Oh, thanks, Carol. And hi, everybody out there in our virtual world that we live in. Um, could I also pay tribute to the late, great Les Robertson, who, with Sortine, his life and business partner, and their close friend Robert Bird and his team from London and Australia. I'd like to pay tribute. It was such an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be working with him as the design engineer of our project. As we all know, he was a doyen of the super tools. He was a scholar, and for those who met him, a true gentleman. It was just such a pleasure. In fact, one of my little treasures, which we collect on the way, is a little ban the bomb peace sign that Les is known for giving to people. He would take them off his coat and give them to people. He was a great pacifist, a beautiful human being, and it's definitely a great loss for the industry. Interesting though, in his 90s, he was still active. He was at the CTBUH functions. He was, he was part of them. He spoke. He was just a brilliant man. So, Vale Les. Carol, could I just start by congratulating you for your continuing great work through the Skyscraper Museum and thanking you for this opportunity of participating in the speaker series, which has been great, really informative. I think that the technical prowess and requirements of the super tall is always mind-boggling. It's been fantastic to listen to the other architects talking about their buildings and the technical aspects, but the common challenge of creating appropriate and enriched sense of place with these major civic interventions is fundamental, of course. And so for me, and I'm sure everyone who's been tuned in, it's been fascinating to see how our colleagues have risen to the potentials that are offered by these major buildings. Now, so this is the slide that Carol just had up before, of course, and just by way of explanation, we were introduced into the world of megatall buildings in 2010 when we were approached by PNB Merdeka Ventures, which was a subsidiary of PNB in Malaysia, and that stands for Permodalan Nasional Berhad, which is a government fund. In fact, I think the largest in Malaysia. And they formed PNB Merdeka Ventures with the primary objective of realising Merdeka 118 under the helmsmanship of CEO Tengku Dato Abdulaziz. And Tengku is still with the project 10 years later, still running it, and we've become very close friends, and it's been a fantastic experience. It always is if you obviously get on well with the client, and personal friendships evolve, which last forever and make the whole process a joy. The building was to be a super tall containing offices for PNB and its subsidiaries, for a Park Hyatt hotel, for a public sky deck, and it was also to have a major retail podium. And as Carol intimated, you may ask why on earth did PNB, with a project of this scale and nature, come down to Australia, given that there's so much expertise around the world in this type of, or in this building typology. It was explained to me later that the board really was looking for someone in their region, and Australia fell firmly into that category. Australia and Malaysia do enjoy a strong relationship with a free trade agreement, and about 10%, I think, of Malaysians who live abroad do so in Australia. And Melbourne in particular is a very popular place for Malaysian people to send their kids for education. So they knew of Eureka Tower, which you can see on the right, and I don't know, it seemed to give us the right credentials, and we were fortunate enough to gain this commission. When we started, Tengku came to Melbourne to look at our work, and we spent a week just talking about the brief, the process, the key milestones, and importantly, the consultant selection. And in fact, the first consultant meeting was in the top of Eureka in the sky deck, which we felt was quite appropriate. So let's just go on to why they perhaps had heard of us. We'd started to get a bit of a reputation in tall buildings, around 300 meters, although this was our first tall building, year 2000, completed. It was Republic Tower. And it was home to 92 apartments, 32 stories tall, but a great emphasis on art and the public interface at the ground plane. And this is something that continues to really occupy us. The tower's working as a landmark or an emblem in the city, but the ground plane and the activities in the ground plane and the way it relates in scale and context to the ground plane is for us very, very important. So this is Eureka Tower. This is the building that they had seen. It has, again, a lot of art. It's got connections in the public realm. And next door to it and behind me, if you can see, is Australia 108, again, which saves a heritage facade, has a lot of planting to the car parking lower component of the building. It has a sky deck, which gives everybody in the building an equal opportunity for view because it contains all of the public facilities. And another project that we're doing with Cox in Melbourne, again, a lot of attention to the ground plane, a hotel and residential tower. And finally, Melbourne Quarter, again, we're doing this with Cox, they're good friends of ours, and a lot of attention to the ground plane with serviced offices, studio apartments, etc., connecting into the fabric of the city, but creating the skyrise elements which can be seen from afar and which add to the character of the city. We received the invitation in 2010, and construction actually started in 2014. We a lot of proximity between Kuala Lumpur and Australia. 7-hour flight, not too bad overnight. 3-hour time distance for calls, etc. So it really was quite an easy process in terms of those sort of logistics. The city of KL is just quite remarkable. It's an organic city in the road networks, in the way it's evolved. And as Carol just mentioned earlier, some major buildings have now popped up, as it were. The Petronas or KLCC Tower, the KL Tower, an observation telecommunications tower, TRX recently, and our Merdeka 118 on the right-hand side. I think these are characteristic of Malaysia becoming part of the international development of cities. There's no doubt that these buildings add to the city if they are properly executed, and again, if they have the right uses at ground plane. This is a good photo because it shows you Stadium Merdeka to the bottom of the orange site, which is our site for the tower, and Stadium Negara on the right-hand side. Both designed by Mr. Jukes. Stadium Negara in the early 60s, and Stadium Merdeka, importantly, in 1957. And that's where the Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, declared independence. And you can see our site wrapping around Stadium Merdeka and towards Stadium Negara, a strange shaped site, but it gave us a lot of opportunity, as it turned out. I need to really talk about the spirit of this place, the genius loci, I suppose. Back in the 50s and 60s, this is how it looked: Stadium Negara in the foreground, Merdeka in the background, and a bit of parkland. And you could see it was the start of a community facility. But now, when we arrived on the scene, there are the two stadiums, but you can see, you can see here, asphalt, excavation, asphalt, which is used for motorbike car parking. This is a really, really important heritage site, and there wasn't any real public facility there. So we were driven by the opportunity of providing a tall tower like this to create a whole new publicly advantaged precinct at the ground level. This is the day 1957 of the Declaration of Independence, a really important moment in the history of Malaysia. And Tunku Abdul Rahman, the then Prime Minister, and his very famous hand salute as he declares independence. This is a very well-liked and well-known photograph, a very important moment for Malaysia. The energy of the place, as well as its heritage importance. We're right next to Chinatown, which is vibrant. It's a tourist attraction. It's got, it's a bit grungy here and there, but it's got that spirit and character that people love when they come to a city like Malaysia or anywhere else in Asia. These sort of environments are pretty rare for us in Australia or perhaps Europe and US. But traffic is a real bugbear. The traffic is just total jams. It's taken me 2 hours sometimes to get from hotel to airport, which if there was no traffic would take about 20 minutes. And there is a monorail that connects to our site as well, fortunately. So we just go back. When we took this project on, there had been work done previous to P&B ownership of the site. And this was it. Yeah. And you can see from this approach, this sort of approach of using Malaysian Islamic architecture and extruding it from a village campus type of background was, I suppose, to relate to the heritage of the site. But really, it wasn't so much about providing the potentials of, public advantage. You can see the sort of campus layout here. So one of the first things that we had to do really was think about how could we rationalize that? How could we reparcelize the site to allow the type of development that P&B wanted, which was more singular and which provided more landscaping and public amenity. And it also involved getting rid of this particular building here, which was only the main police station. So that took a little bit of interesting convincing, but we got there. And then I was informed that in about 6 weeks after my first meeting, I'd be presenting to the Prime Minister, and I needed to present 6 schemes. So 6 schemes, 6 weeks. All of the architects, we go through this. We tried different schemes, so that didn't horrify me too much, but we did have to think carefully about how we arranged, where we put the building on the site. And the red dot is where we ended up. The red dot enabled us to create an axis down along, right down here through the building, which enabled a really compelling kind of public pedestrian route through the site, through the building, and there, an axis like that. And then that's the project as it evolved. And along that axis to the south down here, you'll see there is a park that was designed by Sasaki out of Boston, a really beautiful water park, a cooling place, and a front door to Stadium Merdeka at last. Then up here is the tower. This is the podium through here with a around 88-meter diameter tessellated self-supporting glass dome, which paid homage to the dome that exists on top of Stadium Negara. So it started to create quite, for us, a compelling diagram on the site, and it started to work with the way the land could be utilized from there. The community. This building, or actually all of these tall buildings, are powerful drivers. They're buildings that enable infrastructure to happen. They're buildings that enable public space to be formed by by the local community. They're buildings that attract population, attract commerce. And so they've got quite a lot of responsibility in ways that are more than just about structural and tall and so on and so forth. When I first started on this, I was told by the local traffic engineer that, oh, well, this will need an extension to the subway, the MRT, it will need bridges, it will overpasses, tunnels, etc., etc. I thought he was crazy, actually, but everything that he said happened. And here, there sits one of the key drivers of development in places in Asia, and particularly in this case, in Kuala Lumpur. All of the infrastructure work has happened, and the monorail station, and of course the gardens, which are just 260 metres long by 70 metres wide, a fantastic public amenity cooled by ponds and water mists that can be turned off to create pre-function areas to Stadium Merdeka. So these projects, I think, have a responsibility to find ways to be more than just themselves, to really fund these sort of public advantages. Just a little rendering of down in Sasaki's park, some of the water features and how they relate to our tower. This is the south elevation of the tower. It's a crystalline form. It looks quite sculptural, but actually it wasn't too difficult to extrude. It wasn't torturous. It was just a simple manipulation of the floor plates to create these angled facets. The 6 schemes, yeah, well, we went back to the essentials. So this was really for the presentation of the Prime Minister. We did our crystal on the left, we did a square, a triangle, a cylinder, and on the right, a twisting building, just to cover a range of buildings. In our own sort of processes, we'd come to the view that the diamond on the left-hand side was going to be the most appropriate tower form for this site for a number of reasons. And so the challenge really was in the presentation to take the Prime Minister through all of these and have him agree with us, which fortunately he did. These are the little rapid production models that we used during that meeting with the Prime Minister. Very simple, but they were able to not distract too much, and able for him to focus on basic things like costs and height. And through that process of elimination, we majestically ended up with the project that we wanted. So we had a sculptural and crystalline shape. The way that this building had to fit into the local context were inspired by the songket patterns, the Malaysian materials that are threaded with silver thread. And so you have beautiful patterns like this, but the thread through them becomes quite, quite lively and interesting. And so our tower, in a way, does the same. The triangular patterns were symbolic to us of the various cultures and religions and social stratas that make that complex but rich and beautiful community of Malaysia. And the structural pathways and folds in the actual body or surface of the tower are pathways that will be lit. The structural pathways are the folding pathways. So Fisher Moran Stone have worked with us on all the lighting programs. And the other thing about this too is that we were very conscious of not wanting to try and go one better than Petronas. The Petronas Towers are beautiful towers, and they're crystalline, they're like chandeliers. So the idea of a simpler building just to do with sculptural planes was very appealing to us, and a very different way of using lighting on the building in the evenings. The Petronas Towers and the KL Tower are very crystalline, they're like chandeliers. But this building will be more about pathways of light, which can be tailored or designed for different effect on different occasions. Just while we're on this slide, you can see that the podium is also quite a prismatic shape, which is really the feeling and the composure of the tower coming down into the podium. So often we see quite large buildings sitting on retail boxes which don't have much to do with anything. So it was our intent to try and make the language of the podium seamless and anchoring for the tower. And we have three residential towers, about 60 stories, the tallest, coming out of those podiums. These diagrams just show the geometric form that the building took. The east-west, if you look at that particular elevation, you'll see how it expands as it comes to ground. It spreads its feet and its bulk and anchors the building, and it looks appropriate visually, and it also created a tremendous 30-odd story atrium inside, which helps the flow of the atrium air through the building. And the north elevation, the vertical pathway up the center of the building, is actually where two glass bullet elevators run from ground to the sky deck. They are two-story elevators. The section through the building, you can see on the right, you start to see the belt truss zones. The GFA, there's about just under 300,000 square meters, 87 elevators, 57 of which are in the core of the tower. The rest are transit elevators which connect car parking, etc. Oh, there's a few other facts that, facade panels, 18,000, 8 kilometers of facade lighting. Should be quite a light show. If we look at the bottom section of the tower, diagrammatically on the left, the cofferdam is about 100 meters diameter. It was the wall was about 1.7 meters thick, and it was 20 meters deep. And then within the cofferdam, there were 136 2.2 meter diameter piles that went down 60 meters, and they supported a raft 4 meters deep, and actually poured in three sections, the section under the tower and then the two hemispheres on each side, so that they could be poured in one go, with very strong and complex joining junctions between those 4 meter rafts. The core is diamond shaped, and it creates a 12 meter lease span, so quite an ideal floor plate for office work. And then 8 mega columns. So, I've noticed this in the other buildings that have been presented earlier, a lot of them. And Les and Sortine were, again, the design engineers on those buildings. And so this follows a similar path that we have, again, 8 mega columns. They're about 4.4 meters at the base by 3.2 meters. They're huge. They're bigger than a lot of rooms in Melbourne. They're not really going to fall down. They are incredibly strong, incredibly highly reinforced. The steel in them is a wonder. And they are connected to the core by the outriggers, which in turn are junctioned to the mega columns, which in turn pick up the belt trusses around the perimeter of the building, which you can see in this terrific diagram here. The belt trusses then support perimeter columns, and so this structural system actually allows for alternate pathways in the case of structural trauma to the building through some incident or another. The steel is also mind-boggling. This is standing at the top of one of the outriggers. The steel plate on that outrigger is 100 millimeters thick and welded componentry, and it's 3 stories tall. And those belt truss zones then become the transit zones for elevator crossover. And they're a great look into the building, the structure of the building. They're very, very interesting, very, very sculptural, and probably my favorite spaces. The floor plates, the office floor plates are typically around 2,300 square meters GFA, but they expand and contract. So there's a minimum floor plate, there's a maximum floor plate, but they're around 2,300 square meters. The hotel floors, they are 20 per floor, about 16 stories. And the top of the building erodes out to give it a sculptural termination at the top. The office floors, no intermediate columns, but certainly the services, the electrics, the air conditioning, etc., all floor loaded. So that's a very good way of providing comfort in the floors in the offices. The hotel rooms. The hotel was designed by GA Design out of London. There's 16 levels, 250 keys, Park Hyatt. Beautiful, beautiful views around Kuala Lumpur. And the hotel reception's on level 75. So you enter at the ground floor, take the transit elevator up to level 75, where hotel reception is. And then you don't travel down like some of the hotels, which always confuses me and others, but you then travel up to the hotel rooms from there. On the top, levels 116 and 116 mezzanine, is the sky deck, voluminous, and again, great views. You arrive on level 115 through the glass observation deck, observation elevators. They travel at 8 meters a square meter, a little bit slow, just to allow you to enjoy 1 minute of riding as you get from ground to the observation deck. And you go up escalators to the themed observation deck. And then on top of that is on the mezzanine, that also has outdoor areas. So up at over, like 600 meters or something, you can test the air. The observation deck above is where the thrills are. So stay tuned to that. That should be quite interesting when it's completed. A section just to show you how the sky deck works. It's got restaurants underneath. The elevators on the outside are 2-story. The lowest story delivers to the restaurant, and the upper story of the elevators delivers to the sky deck. Now this is going to the bottom of the building. The bottom of the building is all atrium. On the right-hand side, it addresses Jalan Hang Jebat, and on the left-hand side, it addresses Jalan Maharaja Laila via the Sasaki Linear Park. There's 10 minutes the difference between them in heights. The foyer on the right-hand side is separated by a water feature by Fluidity, designed by Fluidity out of LA. But it's one big holistic space. So as you enter the hotel, it's not actually entering the hotel. It's still part of the journey from outside to inside through to the vertical rise to the hotel floor, reception on level 75. And on the left-hand, on the bottom side, commercial lobby, an escalator and stair system takes you to retail and to the formal linear park lobby on the left. So this is the drop-off to the building. It has a huge skylight. So as you drop off to go into either the hotel or the commercial, you actually can look up and see the tower above you, get a sense of that place. And then the interiors. Now these were really, really interesting. How do we make the right space? It's hot and humid outside a lot of the time. It can be raining. We wanted to provide a cooling environment, kind of awe-inspiring environment as well, and an environment that was appropriately scaled to the height and presence of the building. And so we were quite taken by the caves in Malaysia. And these caves have water on the walls, they have planting, they have light cascading down. And so that led us to interiors that are totally cut as it were, out of stone, out of travertine. And the water features by fluidity on the floor and vertically on the surface of the elevator core, which helps to diffuse the landing and taking off experience in the elevator, all add to this sense of coolness in there. And whilst it's very sculptural, it will always be changing through different light patterns through the skylights. And if we take a walk through the space, you can see that the core of the tower comes down as a crystal, like a stalactite within the cave. And we go up the escalators, we go up either the stairs, and we can go up to the next level, 10 meters up. We can look into the lobbies of the core of the tower. We can drop off to transit elevators to car parking. We can drop off to the retail on the left. You can see in the distance the information desk. As you walk, you're looking up, you look through, again, triangulated skylights that give you a view of the tower above. Looking back at that, and you can see just in the top here, the atrium that is part of the chimney effect that helps the airflow through these spaces. The front information desk here, and now we're on, behind us is the linear park. We call this the Monenko Bar, which is the name of a traditional Malaysian hat. This part of it, looking a little bit radioactive here, but that's backlit onyx, and that highlights the information place of the journey. The atrium is quite a robust high space, which on the first belt truss zone, you can actually stand on it and look down into the atrium 30 odd stories below, if you're game enough. And this, again, here is the building from the south. Crystalline, sculptural, simple, and a nice, we thought, respectful counterpoint to the Petronas Towers in the distance and the KL Tower on the left. The podium is quite large. It's about 200 meters long, but it's very perforated. The public can come into this under shelter from the whole way around the perimeter of the podium. So all the red arrows you can see are accessible by the public. And the podium also, if you can see the yellow dotted line, it hangs out over the building. So people can circulate around the perimeter of the building and stay dry if there's one of those often typical Malaysian or Kuala Lumpur downpours, which I've certainly been caught in, as no doubt some of you all have as well at times. So it's about providing a level of comfort and amenity for the pedestrians. Looking down on the podium, the podium is peeled back to form crevices that are filled with gardens. The gardens are for parts of the tower activities, for the residential activities, and parts of the podium actually touch the ground, so that it provides a very interesting pedestrian experience, and it highlights some of the entry points. If we peel that back, we can see a section through the retail at 7 levels. This is the glass tessellated dome in homage to the Domus Stadium Negara. It's a glass dome which allows light to come down into the depths of the retail, and also when you're in the other levels, lower levels of the retail, provide a draw upwards. Once you are in the higher reaches, you can actually see the tower from the retail. The retail, by the way, was planned by Buckens out of Melbourne. And the top deck was just an idea about how we could do something that was quite remarkable up in this space. In this case, this was looking at a forest, a restaurant, sculpture, and some IT effects. That's still being worked on, but the idea is that that becomes a very, very strong attractor so that people will want to take that vertical journey to the top of the retail. Now, on the eastern side of the tower, the podium lifts its skirt, as it were, to create an indoor-outdoor space for what we call a food street. And that sits opposite Stadium Negara on the right. Stadium Negara is the circle on the bottom of this drawing, will be renovated into a performance space. And Merdeka Place is the outdoor restaurant. And you can see the rhomboid shapes are actually penetrations through which allow trees to go through and light to go down into drop-off areas for the residential and serviced apartments. And there's a little rendering of the sort of ambience of Food Street. Oh, and of course, all the architects watching this will know that our life is architecture. Our thinking about architecture never stops. And so we're better than between dessert and the main course to start looking at design ideas for this food street in our project. And here we have, from underneath the shelter, looking back at Stadium Negara on the right. On the south, on the left-hand side, we have got the entry, the upper podium entry, and this entry here is the entry to the retail. You can see that through the fold here, you can navigate your way around the building under shelter. This little bridge is an experience for the public with respect to the gardens. It's the bridge that actually takes you from the sky deck to the retail podium, to the food and beverage level. It's, as you can see here, crosses over and looks down onto the roof gardens. And here you see the gills, the service gills for all the plant and equipment, and some of the other gardens on the roof. We're now, I'm going to go really fast because I'm running out of time. The wellness centre in the podium for all the people working in the place, the wellness centre with great views outside. Contributions, yes, the building has to be sustainable. It's LEED Platinum. It's got very many ways of making this very sustainable. We have a lot of public infrastructure work that's been done, from tunnels to footbridges to overpasses, etc. And then into construction. In 2015, the excavations started, 100-metre diameter coffer dome. Here we are in 2016, looking down at the piles, ready for the raft slab to be poured. Amazing amount of steel. The bottom steel was, I think, 12 layers of 40-millimetre diameter steel, and here is the building starting to, in 2018, come out of the ground. You can see the scale of that when you look at the excavation equipment. The building starting to be clad. Major pieces of steel engineering structure, and this is the node point at the top of the southern atrium roof, which you can see the scale of when you highlight the people working on it. Gerard van Beek is our project architect that's lived in KL during the construction to coordinate design, enjoying the view, which is quite magnificent. The building taking shape as we look up the northern facade, which has the observation deck elevators. And me, this is not about me. This is to show you how 2 hours on the site affected me. I went on the site many times until COVID. I've come off the site after 2 hours. I'm exhausted, I'm hot, my shirt is absolutely saturated, and it just leads me to paying homage to the workers. There's up to 3,000 workers on this site. They all look a bit strange at me because they're wondering what I'm doing. But 3,000 workers who then properly fed and looked after at break times, having to deal with the logistics of the elevators to take them to and from. We've had 40 million working hours on this site, and to date, there is no, touch wood, there is no major incident or major accident. So yes, here's to the workers. So that's the end of my talk. Just finishing on the King's view of KL as it rises into the future. You know, Tunku Abdul Rahman, when he declared independence, he talked about a legacy for Malaysia of building on a technological, confident future. And we can see here Malaysia, KL doing that, bringing these amazing, beautiful buildings which regenerate, which give back to the population at ground level, which become markers of place in the site. It's a very organic city. When you see these buildings, it kind of places you, you know where you are. So they have very fundamental roles, but they're very much the image of the city and the character of the city. And just finishing on the list of the consultants that were involved on the design of this tower, and without going through them all, but they're here for the record, I pay particular thanks to GDP, who have been our local executive architects on some of the residential and the retail podium, and to RSP, who have been our local executive companions on the tower and one of the residential buildings. It's been a pleasure working with them. It's been a fabulous project, and how privileged were we. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Karl. It was really a spectacular presentation, and I thank you so much for bringing so much dimension to the project. I'll mention to people, if you want to ask a question through chat, I'll try to moderate some of those for the maybe 8 or 10 minutes that we have left for the program. Karl, the scope of any of the super tall projects is really mind-boggling, and as you made clear from the number of people involved and from your work down to the workers and the more than 3,000 people involved on the site, the operation, the management, the marshaling of well, as William Sterrett said back of the Empire State Building, there were armies of workers brought onto the site. That is certainly a dimension. The thing that I wanted to explore more with you, perhaps, is I think a topic of development which is rather foreign to the American model and maybe the non-Asian model, and that is the kind of quasi-governmental role in the participation of the design. You mentioned there were 6 projects that you presented to the Prime Minister. That's not something that happens often in skyscraper design, certainly in the West. So could you talk a little bit more about that so we can understand it better? Rob Whitlock last week talked about working in China with private speculative developers out of Hong Kong who have a business model that they know works very well for them. And then the kind of triangular relationship of the government and then the local planners and planning councils. So can you describe a little bit more the dynamic of, what kind of genesis there is for the project, and then what kind of tensions or collaborations happen among the partners?
Yeah, okay, Carol, great question. PNB is a government fund, and I would risk saying that the Prime Minister was more of a figurehead. So it was a matter of courtesy to present to him, just as the same with Petronas Towers and then Prime Minister Mahathir, who very much, that was his his joy, and he pursued that, and very much attributed to him. So I think this was really a courtesy, but it's a very important step, because the Prime Minister could have said, "I like that one." And I think that that's where it would have gone. So it was a very, very important meeting, and I think quite carefully orchestrated to get to where we needed to get to. The whole process of presentations to PNB was very thorough as well. So Turner International were the project managers, and by the way, Samsung were the builders. But in the early days, with Turner, Tengku, the CEO of PNB Merdeka Ventures, and us as architects, we would present our designs. It would be valued by them. They would make their comments. We would take them on board. We would then come back when they felt we were ready to present to a development board. The development board would then, and they had some members of the board, the development committee, I should say. They had members of the board on there. So that would be the next level of interrogation of the design. And once they were satisfied and we'd responded to any queries they had, we would then present to the board. And the first chairman was Tansri Saji, an elderly gentleman, very much a heritage person, but he was fantastic in a way, because I think this building was counterintuitive to him, but he knew, again, going back to Tunku Abdul Rahman's prophecy of Malaysia being, a technological country and respected internationally for that and prospering from it, he actually condoned what we were doing and supported us. He didn't try to turn it back into that sort of Malaysian Islamic architecture that had been produced before we were there. Well, it must have been tempting for him. So we've worked with 3 of the chair people of the board, and there have been 4, and they've all been remarkably scholarly people that have supported what we've done based on intellect and appropriateness. So on the other hand, there are a lot of private developers in Malaysia, in KL, like any other city, and we, like they, had to go through all of the regulatory procedures. And again, I thank from the bottom of my heart my local executive partners on handling all of that. And so to me, it seemed very seamless and easy. But for them, I think, it was, I'm not sure how political, but whatever it was, they did it very well. The other thing I would say is that politics did play a part in the unraveling of this project time-wise. So we had some delays while Prime Minister got through an election, or there was a query from one of the ministers about the location, or, those sort of things always needed to be politely addressed.
Mm-hmm. And could you speak a bit more to the ambition for height? It's not a small thing to undertake the second tallest building in the world. And of course, there are all these, measuring sticks by which we have variations of how to participate in one or another kind of competition. But still, Merdeka is up there in terms of trying to claim, stake a claim on the world stage in terms of height. Can you say from what source, how early in the design development was this an ambition?
The client group needed a tall building. They wanted to house, they did not want to take too much land surface area. They wanted to house themselves. They wanted to house the head offices of all their subsidiaries. They wanted office space for, for industry. They wanted a hotel. They wanted to make this a place that signified the heritage importance of the site. So it had to be a landmark. At the start, there was no real height. It was like, it was sort of, I think we were saying, oh, this could be a 100-story tower. But as it developed and the program started to fill up, that's where we got to. Look, talking about height embarrasses me a little bit because I don't like the thought that, you know, we're here to build the tallest or the second tallest or whatever. I think that all of these buildings come out of a number of different forces and influences. I think that height, I love height. I mean, I live in Eureka Tower, a quarter of a kilometre in the air. And, you know, I love everything that brings, the view, the sunrise, the sunset. It's a magnificent way of living, and it's a sustainable way of living. What we should be talking about are these buildings as powerhouses. They're social powerhouses, commercial powerhouses. They are the opportunity to create energy, not consume energy. These are the things that we should be seeing in tall buildings. The other thing that we should be seeing is as I have kept saying, is the ground plane. How do these buildings bring such a large community into an existing community? How does it respect them? How do they provide more opportunity for local residents, precinctual residents? How does it help a city like KL in international stature? There's many, many aspects to tall buildings. And as I say, I feel uncomfortable when someone says, oh, are you trying to make the tallest or the second tallest? It's almost, maybe there was a little bit of that in the client's view, a spectacular statement of technological prowess. And I get that and respect it. And I've been very happy to be with our team here at FK, a part of that journey with them. But these buildings have a big responsibility to community, and that's where they need to go. We started this building 10 years ago, and I'm still quite proud of our client and their desire to create something that really marked the most significant heritage site in Malaysia and gave so much back to the population of KL.
Well, that could be a concluding sentence for the session, but let me ask one more question because it came from the audience early on. And also I noticed among our list of participants was Suatin C. So we send our love to Suatin. And the question that was asked was wondering if you could describe more about the structural system, and let me kind of elide my own question coming out of the alternative first schemes. The structural system that was invented to accomplish the formal idea that, as you described it, came out of what I would describe as a kind of a humanist impulse to express the culture of place and to find meaning in form, had to be translated into a series of diagonals, gravity paths down to the ground. Can you talk about the relationship of the chicken and egg relationship of the architectural idea and the structural resolution of those ideas or implementation?
I would like to say hi to Sortine if she's there, and refer back to a moment in New York last year with Sortine and Les, where we were talking about structure architecture. And Les particularly was quite clear. Karl, I'm not here to enforce structure. I'm here to take your design and to make it structurally competent. And so it really was a great partnership in terms of us thinking about the crystalline nature of this building, the way it subtly could represent, the community of Malaysia, and Les Sortine and Robert Bird then worked together to make that work. Obviously, there's now great safety put into these structures, and I think I mentioned earlier the alternate pathways for the columns, which are supported by the belt trusses, etc. All of those things have developed, and I noticed similarities in some of the other buildings. I feel a bit humbled by Sortine's presence, and I ideally wish that she could talk to this herself. But all I will say is that the structure, it is so critical on a building like this. And we don't have any gadgets in the sky that wobble about to try and stop building sway. It's all integrated into the structure. So we accommodate a 1.2 meter sway on each side of the axis. And we accommodate that with about I think a 12-second period. So it's very, very slow. You cannot feel it. And the shape of the building, supported by the structure, is crystalline, so that it disrupts the wind to reduce all of the wind influences. So I don't know what else to say, really. It's just it was there was a synergy, a process of architecture, structure working together, influencing each other in certain ways. And yeah, I again wish Les could be here to enjoy that glass of champagne in the observation deck at the end of this year.
Absolutely.
Oh, and Sortine, of course, who will be.
Well, we are over our usual time, and it was certainly worth it to go to Malaysia and Melbourne and to expand our worldview. And we thank you so much for helping us to do that, and to adding so many dimensions and I suppose colors and shapes to our series. And we hope everyone will return next week, when Adrian Smith on next Tuesday night will talk about multiples of his super talls, and also speculate on mega tall, how high can we go? So we will be talking about height more in the series. And then for the second half of the series, of course, join the engineers as they discourse on the various ways that the super tall took shape over this century. So Karl Fender, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and good night, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, Carol. Bye, everyone.
Hi, welcome everybody. It's 6 o'clock, so it's time to start the fifth of our Worldview Designing Global Super Tall series. Tonight we're having a very special guest from the farthest away we've ever been able to have a speaker talking live at the Skyscraper Museum. Karl Fender is joining us from Melbourne, Australia, where it's 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. So one of the advantages, of the few advantages of our lockdown world at the moment, is to really take advantage of a worldview in terms of bringing architects and engineers and the experience of buildings that are being created in parts of the world that many of us have never traveled to. And I'm going to show just a very few slides now before I introduce Karl, as we have some people still join us. Let me use the same introductory slides that those of you who've been joining us every week have seen before. So our topic of Worldview Designing Global Super Talls focuses in particular on the 21st century typology of super tall buildings. It accompanies the exhibition called Super Tall 2020 at the museum, which is in a virtual version on our website and is in a partially installed version in our gallery, where I'm sitting here now in a somewhat darkened gallery. And the buildings that you see on the screen now are the featured buildings of about a dozen buildings, but especially 9 international towers, well, about three to five from New York City that are among the world's tallest buildings, but as I think you can see in these images, are among the most interesting buildings in terms of formal invention. Engineering allows the 21st century super tall to take many different forms. Computers mean that one floor can be completely different than the one above and below it. There's a new kind of liberation in the formal invention that plays out in the super tall type. And you can see some examples that we've already explored with the idea that in focusing on, in particular on a single building, that we can really kind of expand the knowledge not only about that building, but across building types of some of the themes that keep recurring, and explore special themes on any particular evening. So let me just say that tonight we're traveling to Kuala Lumpur. And you see here Caesar Pelli's Petronas Towers, the twin towers that were completed back in 1998 to take the title for the first time away from North America as being home to the world's tallest building. And it's the ambition that plays out on the skyline of Kuala Lumpur, which is the reason that we're looking at it tonight, because the building that will become the world's second tallest building, Merdeka 118, 118-story tower, is the design of Karl Fender that he will explore and expand upon tonight. Now, in just a couple, and here is that tower. And you see the Petronas Towers in the distance illuminated in the background, the KL Tower, and then another super tall over on the right of the screen, Exchange 106. So for a smallish city of only a couple million people, but much larger in its regional area, Kuala Lumpur, or KL, has an extraordinary number of iconic buildings that bespeak the ambition to compete on the world stage that has played out for more than 2 decades in KL. And by way of that, this timeline, skyline of super talls that you can see on our website in its full scrolling. But in the first segment that shows us the 20th century buildings, from the Empire State Building, which establishes the skyscraper museum definition of super tall, which is 380 meters, not the lower 300 meters, which you can see is represented by the Eiffel Tower, a 19th century structure. And you see the Petronas Towers in green stretching up above the roof height of the Sears Tower in the purple North American buildings. So this idea of worldview, we're really exploring across the series, and with the architects who are the leaders of the team of the extraordinarily large number of professionals who are brought into the project of building a super tall skyscraper. And so we're almost through the on the left column, the architects series. We'll finish off the architects with Adrian Smith, who is really the king of the super tall, who has designed 8 of them so far over his career. He's not designed more, but he's accomplished 8 in construction. And then on the right-hand side, you see the list of structural engineers who will explore not only the ideas and the strategies of their structural theories and construction, but also the history of the super tall that goes back into the late 20th century and with buildings like Petronas Towers and Jin Mao. So we're going to be looking with the engineers more retrospectively across the couple of decades of construction of these buildings in order to see how the type evolves. Let me go back one slide, but to mention in this lineup, I am acutely aware that everyone who is speaking in this series is a male. they are, as I've just described, the people who represent the top of the team of the designers who conceptualize, who compete for the commission, who conceptualize the design, who carry it out through the many years, usually about 5 years, of the process of actually constructing a super tall. It is men who dominate this practice of tall buildings, but I want to especially credit, and Karl is going to do this in his talk, one of our women engineers, Sautin C, who happens to be the lead structural engineer on the Merdeka 118 project. And she can't be with us tonight. I just have a picture of Sautin when we see her in very happy days from a couple of years ago. And Sautin, many of you know, is the wife and partner of Les Robertson, who is seen at the same party at the Skyscraper Museum, receiving a kind of Lifetime Achievement Award. And we want to pay special homage and send our love to Sautin, as many of you know that Les Robertson passed away just about 2 weeks ago, and both Les and Sautin were designers on the Merdeka project tonight, and I think Karl wants to pay a special kind of homage to their work, and in the case of Les, to his life as one of the world's great structural engineer and most brilliant structural engineers, and a really great human being as well, someone who I was privileged to call a friend for a couple of decades, and from whom I learned an enormous amount about skyscrapers, design, construction, and as Les would always say, buildability. So yeah, I'm going to ask Karl to come onto the to the screen as I give him a brief introduction. Karl will show us some of his extraordinary tall buildings in Australia, because he's a Melbourne native, or Melbourne-based architect, where his firm Fender Katsalidis has been working for several decades on the Australian scene. And it's partly because he was considered a regional architect in Malaysia that he won this extraordinary commission for the building Merdeka 118, which will become, as I mentioned, the world's second tallest building behind or below, I guess, the Burj Khalifa. Karl is also the architect for the two tallest buildings in Australia, his Eureka Tower and Australia 108, which if he moved his screen around, you are seeing the base of those buildings behind him and out the window, and he's going to show us some hero shots of those towers. So here I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you Karl Fender, who is someone I've met on several occasions already in professional conferences. I think, Karl, we stood next to each other and chatted on our first meeting about a half an hour going through passport control from Shenzhen to Hong Kong, as I recall. And then I've seen you in Australia since. So it's really a delight to be able to introduce you to our New York and our extended audiences here from the Skyscraper Museum.